the grand halls of marble and gold, where emperors walked and gods were praised, a darker story was unfolding far from the Senate, far from glory. Beneath the silken sheets and behind locked palace doors, there were no names, only bodies, boys, taken in their youth, reshaped to serve Rome's most powerful men, not as soldiers, not as slaves, but as something far more tragic. Male concubines, praised for their beauty, stripped of their freedom. They existed to please, to obey, to endure. This is not a story of lust. This is a story of pain. A tale whispered in the shadows of the empire, and today it will be heard. In ancient Rome, the currency of power wasn't always gold. Sometimes it was youth, beauty, obedience. To be born beautiful as a boy in the Roman Empire could mean a fate worse than death. While the legions marched and the crowds cheered in the Colosseum, boys with soft skin and delicate features were being purchased, trained, broken. The wealthy elite, senators, generals, and emperors themselves had concubines. Not wives, not lovers, property. A concubinus, they were called. A word that meant companion, but the reality was far crueler. Some were born into slavery. Others were sold by desperate parents, promised education and prosperity. What they received instead was isolation, submission, and erasure. Their names were often changed, their hair styled like girls, their clothing feminized. They were reshaped not just physically, but mentally into perfect, silent playthings for the ruling class. Nowhere was this system more visible, more terrifying than in the palace of the emperors. Take Emperor Tiberius, for example. By the time he withdrew from Rome to the island of Capri, Tiberius had built himself a world where law did not exist. There, he surrounded himself with boys called the little fishes, so named because they were taught to swim between his legs in his private baths. They were brought in from all corners of the empire, some as young as 8. They were trained to be silent, to smile, to obey without question. Tiberius was not alone. Emperor Nero was infamous for his marriages to boys like Sporus, a young slave whom Nero had castrated and paraded in public, dressed as an empress. To the people of Rome, this was shocking, but not for reasons you might think. It wasn't the exploitation that horrified them, it was the emperor's role as the submissive partner that made them whisper. In Rome, power was everything, even in sex. But for the boys, there was no power, no choice, only survival. The trauma these boys endured cannot be measured in scars. It lived in their silence, their eyes, their stolen identities. Imagine a child raised in a palace, surrounded by splendor, but never allowed to speak freely. Every word rehearsed, every movement controlled. Their value measured not in thoughts, but in how pleasing they appeared lying still. Some were kept in private chambers. Others were passed around among noble guests, forced to entertain on stage and in bed. They had no family, no rights, and often no future. Those who grew too old were discarded, replaced. Some were gifted to other elites. Some were sent to the mines. Some simply vanished. And worst of all, many began to believe they deserved it. They were told their beauty was a gift, that they were lucky. But how do you explain luck to a boy who cries alone each night, hoping for death and waking to another day of being owned? Then came Emperor Elagabalus, a ruler whose decadence became legendary, but whose use of male concubines pushed cruelty to new extremes. Elagabalus, barely 14 when crowned emperor, surrounded himself with hundreds of male lovers, slaves, soldiers, dancers, and priests. He ordered them to perform acts in public that even Rome, in all its depravity, struggled to comprehend. He did not just keep concubines. He collected them, named them, branded some. He called himself the Bride of Rome and reportedly offered gold to any man who could satisfy him. But the boys he kept close, they weren't lovers. They were possessions. One concubine, a Syrian boy named Hierocles, was forced into a mock wedding with the emperor dressed as a Roman bride while senators watched in stunned silence. Hierocles wasn't allowed to leave his side. He was beaten for disobedience, shamed for not smiling enough. Elagabalus demanded submission, and when he tired of his toys, he discarded them like broken dolls. Their names are gone, their stories erased. The male concubines of ancient Rome were not just victims of power, they were victims of history. We speak the names of emperors, but not the boys who bled beneath their bed sheets, not the ones who cried behind palace doors. What became of them? Some took their own lives. Others grew old and bitter, shunned by society, labeled as damaged goods. A few, very few, escaped, only to live in silence, too ashamed to speak. Rome was a civilization of wonders, art, literature, law, but it was also a machine built on flesh. When we speak of history, we often forget the ones who had no voice, the ones who weren't heroes but hostages. Let this not be just another footnote in the blood-soaked pages of empire. Let it be a reckoning. For every faceless boy who suffered in the name of pleasure, we remember, and in remembering, we promise to never let power hide its crimes in beauty again. In the empire that worshiped gods, senators, and spectacle, a boy's body was simply a commodity, a transaction wrapped in perfume and silk. In elite Roman society, owning a male concubine was not just accepted, it was fashionable, a status symbol, a conversation piece. These boys were displayed at banquets. They played music, poured wine, smiled when spoken to, but they knew the moment the guests left, the real purpose began. Their beauty was currency, their suffering, a private entertainment. Some emperors and nobles even kept catalogues, records of body measurements, skin tone, voice pitch, and preferred duties. A brutal reduction of a human soul into statistics of pleasure. And these weren't isolated cases. Across the empire, in villas, ships, and bathhouses, male concubinage was a routine feature of Roman decadence, and a quiet engine of trauma. Before a boy became a concubinus, he was broken. The process was methodical. He was stripped of identity, new name, new garments, new rules, forbidden to speak unless spoken to, taught to smile even when he cried. Trainers, often former concubines themselves, taught them how to walk, how to breathe, how to touch and be touched. It was not education. It was erasure. Some boys tried to run. Those who failed were flogged publicly or mutilated privately. It was said that some trainers used isolation as a weapon, locking boys in silent, dark rooms for days until they stopped asking for their mothers. The goal was not obedience. It was dependence. To make the boy believe that this life of velvet chains and whispered commands was all he would ever deserve. And many believed it, because hope was more dangerous than pain. Perhaps the darkest chapter in this horror was the market of castration. Rome had no formal law against male concubines, but castrating boys to ensure purity or control was a growing trend. It started in the East in the Persian and Byzantine courts and made its way to Rome as underbelly. Parents, driven by poverty or promises, agreed to it. Slave traders offered discounts on preserved boys. Physicians, sworn to heal, were paid to mutilate. And the boys, they awoke in agony. Their voices forever changed. Their manhood removed not for help, for convenience. Castration made them easier to control, less likely to resist, unable to reproduce, and eternally marked. Some Roman emperors like Domitian specifically requested eunuchs for their court. They claimed it was for hygiene, or celibacy, or tradition. But in truth, it was about power, because nothing screams dominance like the ability to rewrite someone else's body. Not every concubine was abused violently, but even the so-called loved ones lived in cages lined with silk. Some emperors claimed to love their boys, wrote poetry about them, built statues, and lavished them with gifts. But love without freedom is not love. It is possession. Let us revisit Sporus, the boy emperor Nero married after castrating him. Nero dressed him in empress's robes, made him appear at public events. But behind the scenes, Sporus was mocked, whispered about, feared. When Nero died, Sporus was passed around by new political masters, each exploiting his fame and tragedy. Eventually, he could no longer bear the life of being a human trophy and took his own life. That is what love meant for concubines. Affection wrapped in chains. But there were whispers in the dark, a silent network of former concubines, eunuchs, and sympathetic slaves began to form across Rome. They passed messages, sheltered runaways, even poisoned cruel masters when the opportunity arose. In the shadows of the empire, resistance lived. Not loud, not grand, but real. One documented case describes a eunuch named Elagabalus who assassinated a Roman governor after years of abuse. Another tells of a group of concubines who fled together, disguising themselves as a theater troupe and vanishing into Gaul. We don't know their names, but we know their courage, because survival itself was a form of defiance. When Rome fell, the stories of the male concubines were buried beneath rubble and ash. Historians rarely spoke of them. Texts were burned, records vanished, and still, their trauma echoed into future empires: Byzantium, Ottoman harems, European courts, where boys, again and again, were bought and silenced. Their legacy is not one of culture, but caution, because power unchecked becomes a predator. And in every empire that rose after Rome, the same shadows lingered. Narrator soft, emotional. We remember emperors by their victories. We remember Rome for its greatness. But tonight, we remember the forgotten, the boys who lit no torches, but bore the heat of them. They were never supposed to be remembered, never meant to speak. But in this moment, in this telling, they are seen. Let this be more than history. Let it be a warning, a reckoning, a prayer to every soul used, erased, and broken in the name of empire. We see you now. We say your name even if history forgot to. This was the tragic life of a male concubine in the Roman Empire. And this is torture history.